Hello and welcome to another off-the-shelf board game review, a video series where I'll take a board game, show you how to play that game, show you some sample gameplay, and then give you my final thoughts on the game overall. My hope is with this series you'll be able to look at a board game and decide if it's a game that's going to be right for you. What I really hope to do here is to avoid the hype and help you decide if this is going to be a game that you will like. This week we're going to look at Cutthroat Caverns. Cutthroat Caverns is a semi-cooperative game, and don't go running away. I know we've heard that a whole bunch of times about the semi-cooperative, but in Cutthroat Caverns' favor, this game is from 2007, although this is the most recent printing of the game with the 2.0 edition of the rules that was released in 2012. And unlike most of the semi-cooperative hidden betrayer games, this game doesn't really have a hidden betrayer because everybody's out to get you, everybody's your enemy, but you must all work together the same. The game box says it best when it says, "Without teamwork, you'll never survive. Without betrayal, you will never win." Cutthroat Caverns is for 3 to 6 players, ages 14 up. They say the average playtime is about an hour and a half. I've seen it go down to about an hour with 3 players, but an hour and a half seems like a good average, especially for your first couple of games. It does get a little bit quicker, which is definitely a plus anytime you play a game with player elimination and also with take-that mechanics. In Cutthroat Caverns, each player is represented by a hero. Now, thematically, imagine that Cutthroat Caverns is what happens after the group of adventurers goes down to the deepest, darkest layer of the dungeon, defeats the bad guy, and they now have the super awesome item that everybody wants. And unfortunately for all your party mates, only one person can have it, and in your opinion, you know who that should be. And of course, to make matters worse, you didn't clear the best path on your way down to the deepest, darkest level of the dungeon, so you're going to have to fight your way back out, and your way back out is going to be protected by more monsters. All these monsters have hit points, they all have their special attacks, and they're all out to make sure you don't get out of this dungeon alive. So like any good party of adventurers, you're going to have to fight your way out by playing cards on these monsters to defeat them. Here's the trick, and here's where all the fun of Cutthroat Caverns comes in. You don't want to quite take these monsters out too quickly. You want them to beat on your fellow party members just a little bit, just to make sure that by the time you get out of the dungeon, they're hurt or possibly dead. You know, accidents do happen. And only the best, most helpful, strongest survivor is the one who can get the magic item at the end of the dungeon. Can you help your fellow party members out, conquer some more monsters, escape the dungeon, but of course you want to make sure that you help the most and you happen to be the least injured and the most prestigious party member once you escape the dungeon. That way you escape with the big bad magic item. That is Cutthroat Caverns. Now, before I show you how to play Cutthroat Caverns, there's a couple concepts you need to understand. First, and the big concept to understand, and while I'll say this, I want to let you know this does change with the future expansions, but the most important thing to understand is that all the heroes in the game are exact cookie cutters of each other. They all have the exact same amount of special cards on the draw deck. They all have the exact same amount of potential damage they can do. They have access to all the exact same cards. They all have the exact same amount of hit points. So it really doesn't matter which hero you play. They're all exactly the same. And I say that until you bring out the very first expansion, where it gives player powers, and then the most recent the most recent expansion modifies that even more. The next thing you need to understand about Cutthroat Caverns is there's 3 basic different kinds of cards that come with the game. You have your attack cards, which are red, which are broken down into 3 different sets. You have your generic attack cards. You have your special attack cards, which are a generic attack card unless they're played by the hero that you're specifically using. This one has a picture of this hero right here. So if she ever plays this card, she has the potential to do extra damage only when she plays this card. But if any other player has it in their hand and uses it, they can only use it for the general basic damage on the card. You have your special kind of attack cards. I'll get into those in a little bit. You have your blue cards, which allow you to screw with the other players. And then finally, you have your item cards. Now, the difference between all these cards is that item cards are played face up on the table. They're never played from your hand. And you basically generally only play them between rounds, between combats with monsters. There's 2 kinds that you can use during fights, but generally, for the most part, your item cards are only used between fights. Your blue cards are played from your hand, and they basically use to screw the other players over and make their attacks miss, do extra damage, or just basically make their life a little more difficult. And then attack cards are played face down on the table, so the players around the table don't actually know which card you played until it's your turn to reveal your card, and then its effects are going to come into effect. The next thing you have is you have your bad guys. Can't have a dungeon crawl without some bad guys to beat up, and this game has plenty of them to handle. Generally, in every single game, you're only going to fight 9 of these baddies, and you need to survive through 9 fights to determine a winner at the end. There are some cards that make that drag out a little bit longer, especially the Blood Mage, who will actually spawn more mobs and make the fight take quite a bit longer. All creatures in this game are going to make things just a little bit differently, so I can give you a rough overview on how each creature plays, but do know that each one of these creatures has their own special power. They're all going to play quite a bit differently, and they're going to modify the rules in some way. So if I tell you something, a creature card says something different, do what the creature card says, because they're there to make things more entertaining. Each creature card is going to list a whole bunch of statistics, and they're pretty easy to figure out once you understand the game. The most important thing you need to understand is how much prestige that creature gives, and that's going to be listed right here, and it's going to be a number. And at the end of the game, whichever player has the most prestige is going to be the winner of the game, if they survive. So if you have the most prestige and you happen to die on the 9th encounter, guess what? Game over for you. Even though you have the most prestige, you still lost. The other thing to know is that each creature is going to have a type. They're going to have beast, fiend, ghost, a whole bunch of different types. And for the most part, in the basic game, it's not that important. There's only one single card in the entire base game that's going to matter for those. And that's Holy Water, which does extra damage versus fiends and versus undead and versus other kind of nasties. But again, there's only one single card of Holy Water in an entire deck. And it's only going to affect, I think there's only 5 or 6 creatures which fall into that subtype out of a game that's 25 different creatures in it. So most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about that. Each creature is going to have a special ability that's going to be listed on the card. And the final, and this is the most important thing to understand, is that each creature is going to have an amount of hit points based on the amount of players in the game. Now, this is the amount of players that started the game, not the amount of heroes that are currently in the game. So if you're on the 8th creature and you start with 6 players, but 2 players have been wiped out, this guy is still going to be at the nasty 280 hit points instead of where you'd have in a 4-player game, which would be 190. Very important distinction. Monsters come into play with the amount of hit points you had at the start of the game, not the current amount of players in the game, so watch that very carefully. Which is one of the main reasons why you want to make sure you don't start knocking out your fellow compatriots too early in the game, because that's going to guarantee that everybody's going to get wiped out. And then finally, every single creature is going to have a special kind of attack, and that's going to be listed on the bottom bar right here. It's going to be based on the amount of players, and there are 2 types of attacks. You have special attacks, such as what you get from the Lurker, and then you have initiative-based attacks, such as you have on the Ripper. Now, the Ripper is going to attack whoever it tells you based on the initiative of the player. Initiative is going to be drawn at the beginning of every single combat round. Not at the beginning of every single fight versus a new monster, but at the beginning of every single initiative round. Every single combat round, you're going to get a brand new initiative. And creatures such as Ripper are going to attack whoever has the initiative card that it states. In Ripper's example, he attacks whoever has initiative number 2. Whereas you have creatures like the Lurker, who's going to attack creatures or attack heroes in a different way. And the way the Lurker attacks, as an example, is he's going to attack whoever happened to hit him for the least amount of damage during the current combat round. Now that you understand the basics of Cutthroat Caverns, I can show you exactly how to play Cutthroat Caverns. To set up the game, you're going to take the deck of monsters. There's 25 monsters in the base game. You're going to shuffle up and you're going to start with 9 monsters. And those are going to be the monsters the players are going to have to fight to survive the dungeon. You also need to make sure that you give each player an initiative card. You're going to take amount of initiative cards based on the amount of players. In a 4-player game, you're going to take initiative cards 1 through 4. You're simply going to shuffle them up, and then players are going to randomly pick 1 initiative card for each one of their players. And that's going to be the initiative order that they're going to go when their turn comes around. Each player is then going to get a hand of exactly 7 cards. And if in their hand of 7 cards they happen to get a green card, it's going to be placed immediately on the table, face up. Remember, green cards are item cards. Blue and red cards are played from the hand, and they're kept in your hand for other players not to see your hand. No other player should ever know what cards are in your hand at any time. After all the players have the card, you simply flip over the top card of the dungeon, and that's going to be the first creature you're going to encounter in this game. Each hero is going to start with exactly 100 hit points. You're going to start with encounter number 1, and you're going to figure out how many hit points you have based on the amount of players. Ripper is a pretty basic monster. He's going to have 190 hit points for a 4-player game. 3-player game has 150, a 5-player game has 240, and a 6-player has 280 hit points. We're playing a 4-player game here, so Ripper is going to get 190 hit points, which we're going to track with this bead at the 190 mark, and we're going to use that to track his hit points as he's slowly defeated. And whichever hero manages to land the killing blow to defeat him is going to gain his prestige card and get 3 prestige points towards the victory conditions. If players wish to use any potions, they must make sure they use them now before any of the combat cards are set down. Once a combat card is set down and revealed, it's too late for any player to use any potions except for an Alchemist Fire potion and one other item, which is an amulet, which allows them to have a larger card size hand. And speaking of hand size, you can never have more than 7 cards in your hand If at any time you have more than 7 cards, unless you have that magical amulet, you must discard down to 7 cards again. And yes, this does make it kind of tough because a hero can die with a healing potion in their hand just because they didn't take it before the encounter started. Kind of a nastiness about the game, but that is Cutthroat Caverns. Once the combat starts, players are going to pick 1 card from their hand, and it has to be an attack card, which are the red cards, and they're going to place that card face down without letting any other player know exactly which card they've played face down. Once each player has placed their cards face down, the player number 1 who has the highest number of initiative, player number 1 is going to reveal their card, and then other players can get the chance to play blue cards to adjust that attack, to change that attack, or to nullify that attack, just depending on what their strategy may be. If a card played isn't enough to defeat the creature currently in play, and if it isn't defeated, blocked, or somehow adjusted by another player playing a blue card, it is added to the damage stack. And if it happens to have any other special abilities, such as stab and grab, which is going to allow you to steal a potion from another player, its effects go into play immediately. Players will continue to reveal their cards in initiative order, adding it to the damage stack as long as it's not countered or stopped in any particular way, making sure every time they add it to the damage stack to make sure it's not enough to completely defeat the monster instantly. Because if it is enough to defeat the monster at this point, the combat round immediately comes to an end. The player who landed the killing blow is going to get the prestige for killing the monster. Now in this case, we haven't reached that because we've only done 25 damage, and this monster happens to have 190 hit points, so we're nowhere close to that, so we'll keep revealing the cards, adding them to the damage stack, giving players a potential or the opportunity to play blue cards to screw with the other player's attacks anytime they want, as long as they follow any wording on the cards. Now you have to watch the wording on the blue cards, because some of the blue cards say play before another player reveals their attack. Some say play after a player reveals their attack. So make sure you watch that wording because it's very specific, and I do recommend you give each player a chance before you reveal your attack card to ask all other players if they have a blue card they want to play to counter your attack before it's revealed. Once all the players have revealed their attack cards and add their attack cards to the attack stack, as long as those cards were not defeated or blocked in any particular way, the monster is then going to take all the damage. Now this is a little bit of the confusing thing, because if during the attacks, if your total was enough to defeat the monster, it defeats it instantly. But until that point, you actually don't reduce its life points at all. Once all the players have played all their cards, and if the monster has not been defeated, at this point you're going to start reducing its life tracker. So in this case, we managed to do 10 plus 50 is 60, plus 20 is 80, plus 5 is 85 points of damage. Ripper's going to go from 190 all the way down to 105 hit points. This is when he takes his total damage. Remember how I told you that each monster has either one or of two kind of attacks? You either have a monster with a special attack, such as this monster, which is going to attack every single player depending on how they did damage, or you have attacks such as what Ripper does, is he attacks a player based on their initiative card. The way to tell the difference is if a monster says attack somebody with an initiative card, it's not a special attack. If it doesn't attack a specific initiative card, it is a special attack. So that's the only way to tell the difference. Attacks initiative card, not a special attack. If it doesn't attack an initiative card holder, it is a special attack. So once we've done damage to our creature and adjusted their life total based on the damage stack, if it is a creature with a specific special kind of attack, we're going to go ahead and follow its instructions now. For example, the Basilicanth, he says that he's going to attack the player who did the least amount of damage to it. So if we look at our damage stack, we see that player 1 placed the 5. So he did the least amount of damage, so he's going to take whatever effect would happen in this case. It would be 15 points of damage, and their life total will be adjusted immediately. Luckily, this isn't the creature we're fighting. We're attacking Ripper, who's a little bit more simplistic, so we don't need to worry about it. If it's an initiative attack, at this point we can discard the damage stack, add it to the discard pile. Then we need to figure out exactly which which hero Ripper's going to attack. Now, if you look at the Ripper card, it says that he's going to attack the player who has initiative card number 2. Here's the trick, though. Initiative is going to be adjusted before Ripper gets to make his attack. So player number 2 can stop sweating bullets for now, because they may not keep this initiative card number 2. So before Ripper makes his attack, each player gets to take their initiative cards. They are going to be shuffled up again, and then they're going to be randomly dealt back out to our player. And then whoever ends up with card number 2 is the one who's going to get attacked by the creature. In this case, Ripper's going to go ahead and do 15 points of damage to Nyx, from bringing her hit points down from 100 down to 85. After the monster's had its chance to attack, each player is going to draw a new card. one single card only. And if they happen to get an item, they have to play it face down on the table next to their character. Remember, you can never have more than 7 cards in your hand, so if for some reason you have more than 7 cards and you don't have the amulet, you're going to discard down to 7 cards. That's going to end that combat round, and we start a new combat round with players placing cards down again. This is going to continue until the monster is reduced down to 0 life. Whoever does the killing blow on the monster adds the monster card to their side of the board. That's going to give them prestige points towards the end of the game, and of course that is how you determine the winner. After the players defeat the bad guy, they're all going to get a chance to go through a quick little cleanup phase where players can get their prestige awarded to them. Then they get the chance to discard any cards they happen to have in their hands. You can discard all the way back down to 0 if you like, and then you're going to draw a hand up to 7 new cards, which you're going to use for the next encounter. Then they advance the turn marker bead, because remember, we're only going to go through 9 rounds, and we need to track the extra prestige bonus we're going to get as we advance that tracker, because starting with rounds 7, 8, and 9, the monsters we defeat are going to give us bonus prestige. It's kind of a nice little catch-up mechanic built in the game to make sure that nobody's ever left totally out in the cold. Players are going to keep doing this, defeating monsters, making sure you're adjusting the encounter number track, because as you start going down the encounter track, the 7th encounter is going to give +3 bonus prestige points. And the game does come with counters to help you track those. So if this was a 7th encounter, he's normally worth 3 prestige points. If you defeat him as a 7th encounter, he's actually worth 6. All the way up to the 10th encounter, if you happen to get that far, which is going to be worth 5 extra prestige points if you happen to defeat that creature. Now luckily, barring encountering the Blood Mage, in the first edition of the game without any of the expansions, you're generally only going to have 9 encounters. If you do happen to fight the Blood Mage, you don't defeat the Blood Mage too quickly, you can have 10, 11, or even 12 encounters, because every round the Blood Mage survives is going to add 1 more encounter that you have to defeat to the encounter stack. And not to get ahead of myself in the review, but that's half the fun of the game, is how all these creatures play ever so slightly differently, adding to the replayability and the enjoyment of Cutthroat Caverns. Most of the blue cards in Cutthroat Caverns are pretty self-explanatory. You go ahead and read them, and they tell you exactly when you can use them and exactly what their effects do. For example, Plan B allows you to switch up the initiative. For example, if you happen to be fighting Ripper, who's going to attack the player who has the number 2 initiative, if you happen to have the number 2 card and you happen to have Plan B, you can always play this card, switch initiative with another player so they become your hero and happen to take all the damage that Ripper may deal out. So most of the blue cards are pretty easy to figure out. The only cards that may cause a little bit of difficulty are going to be the tactics cards, which are tactics cards and rider cards, which can modify the damage stack a little bit. We'll start by explaining the tactics cards, which are called standing cards, which modify the future attack. They don't actually happen as the attack. What they're going to do is they're going to modify the attack that that player plans on using. You have a card such as Double Strike, which is you're going to play face down. Remember, all attack cards are played face down and then revealed all together on your initiative turn. When you have a card such as Double Strike, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and reveal it, and the text is going to tell you exactly what you need to do. For the example of Double Strike, what's going to happen as soon as you reveal this card is you're going to draw a card from the deck. You're going to add this card to your hand of cards, and then you get to pick 2 cards from your hand and actually play them as your actual attack. So if I wanted to, I can play this card, which is a card I just happened to draw, and then I could add this card. So I've done a total of 60 points of damage on this round, and I get to add both these cards to the damage stack, as long as another player doesn't play a blue card to screw up my attack. The next kind of special attack cards you're going to have are going to be your rider cards. Now rider cards are a little bit interesting. Again, you're going to play it face down, so other players don't know exactly what cards you happen to be deciding to play. And then once it's revealed, you're going to place on top of your character, because you're not actually going to play it this round. It's basically going to modify the attack you're going to make next round. And the most important differentiator here is the fact that some of these monsters are going to attack players based on who does the most damage, who does the least amount of damage, or various things along those lines. So sometimes these rider cards are very, very good to play. Sometimes they're not so good. And again, that's part of the strategy of Cutthroat Caverns. Now I just want to mention one more thing about item cards. I skipped it earlier and I don't want to forget about this. There are item cards that allow you to heal other players. The trick is the other player you want to heal has to be a willing participant in the healing. And it says so on the card, just in case you forget. The nice thing about using a healing potion on a different player, you know, in your self-sacrificial attempt to be a team player, if you happen to use a Cure Wounds on another player, it's actually going to give you 2 prestige points that are going to go towards your victory point total at the end of the game. hey, you're a team player, you're helping them out. They shouldn't complain. There's only one more little bit of instruction I need to give you when I show you how to play Cutthroat Caverns. And the important thing is you have to play a card on your turn. You cannot say, I don't want to play a card, even if you don't have cards to play. If you just happen to have a hand full of blue cards and not a single attack card in your hand, you still have to play one of these cards, and this is the only time you can play one of these blue cards face down, is if that's all your hand happens to be. On your turn, when it's your turn to place your card face down, you must pick one of these cards, place it face down, and then when it comes your turn to reveal, you have to reveal it, and it goes to the discard pile completely wasted. You have to play a card on your turn, but you can't play a blue card like that if you happen to have at least one red card in your hand. You have to play that red card. I think I've shown you enough how to play Cutthroat Caverns. Going to clean everything up, and then I'm going to go ahead and set the game up for a full game of Cutthroat Caverns using 3 players.